Hi guys, welcome back to lecture 2 on population genetics. Today we're going to talk about genetic changes in populations. Yesterday I told you about this Hardy-Weinberg equations, and we looked at the frequency of the homozygous recessive type, and we could figure out what the allele frequencies for the dominant gene were, which is kind of interesting. And you may ask yourself, why would I want to do that? And well, that's what population geneticists do. So Hardy-Weinberg is important. We're going to talk a little bit, we're going to elaborate on that today. We're also going to talk about what other kind of forces can affect population genetics, like sexual reproduction or the size of populations or natural selection on the population itself. And then, of course, in the end, we're going to talk about how that influences evolution. So the Hardy-Weinberg refers to this model for populations. And in a Hardy-Weinberg population, we're at genetic equilibrium. All right. Now, there's a concept called the gene pool. And that's like if you look at a population, all the genes in that population represent this gene pool. It's a theory. In Hardy-Weinberg, if the Hardy-Weinberg was able to obey these constraints I'm going to talk to you about, there would just be no evolution. There'd be no change. And you could, imagine a desert island, right, where nobody ever comes or goes. No, there's no immigration or migration. There's no selection. You don't ever pick your mate. You just mate with everybody else. There's no predators that are taking out a certain type of person. What you'd expect to find after 1,000 years is that really you'd see the same genes present. That's Hardy-Weinberg. It never really happens, but we can use that model to make predictions about what is happening in real populations. So there are 5 conditions required to meet Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Number 1 is no gene flow. All right. So if I have a population, I can't have new individuals coming or certain individuals leaving, because that would upset my equilibrium. Makes sense? I would be taking alleles away. I can't do that. We're adding alleles to the population. So first condition of Hardy-Weinberg, no gene flow. Next is random mating. All right, so hopefully you guys are going to pick your mates when you go out into the real big world. But if we were talking about a Hardy-Weinberg population at equilibrium, you couldn't have any selection. That is, everybody would reproduce with everybody else. Because, if one trait, like, I don't know, attractiveness, tallness, how much money you make, was more attractive and would allow you to mate more often, that would screw up our allele frequencies. Random mating. So you have to have random mating, no mate selection. Another condition of Hardy-Weinberg is called genetic drift. All right. So genetic drift is really a phenomenon that's born out of statistics that affects small populations. Okay, and so the classic example is here. If I've got a little group of sheep and I have the one black sheep, and that black sheep dies, that can make a big influence or have a big influence on that special gene that sheep's carrying. Okay, so genetic drift is a statistical phenomenon that really affects small populations. The smaller you are, the more likely that a change could have a dramatically large effect. Genetic drift. Another condition is no mutations, right? So if I have this population in equilibrium, I can't have the genes just spontaneously changing, right? That would screw up the equilibrium. And then last but not least, I can't have natural selection. So I couldn't have a leopard run around the island killing all the people that couldn't run fast, because that would reduce the, select for certain genes and select against other genes. Okay, so that's it. Those are the 5 conditions of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Remember, it's an idealized view of populations, and of course, in science, we have to use models to understand complex systems, and populations are complex systems, to say the least. Well, one of the most important things that affects evolution, remember, mutation is one of them. We can just have random changes, but we also do this gene shuffling thing. And not only that, but more importantly, is that there is this mate selection. Okay? So we pick other individuals to mate with based on their phenotype, right? Based on the traits that they express, whether it's the size of the male or the colors. This is a mandrill baboon. He's really beautiful, and the more radical his colors are, obviously, the more likely he is to mate. And of course, that means that he'll have a lot of babies with more radical colors. So that's the mandrill. So sexual reproduction is part of natural selection, in the sense that the environment, the individuals in the population of that environment are picking for certain traits. Of course, there are some problems with sexual reproduction, like inbreeding. So if I have a small population and I have lots of, and if I have, lots of mating and inbreeding through sexual selection, I can have problems. I can have the accumulation of bad genes. All right. So, modern dogs, tigers in captivity can all be a victim of this. One of the taboos in human society across the planet is the idea that you can't marry your brother or sister, of course. And the reason is because it's really a bad idea from a genetic standpoint, all right? Now, human populations generally have been small tribes, and so there's going to be some inbreeding there. But lots of times, if you look at tribal communities, what one of the things they do is they go to other tribes and they, marry other members of other tribes. It's a common thing to have happen. When you talk about tribes, here's one here. This is a tribe of people that have avoided contact right up until now. They're in Senegal, so I guess that's in the Indian Ocean. And the problem is, if you come see these people, they will they'll throw poison arrows and spears at you and kill you. In fact, they just killed somebody a couple of years ago. Some guy wanted to go meet them, and I think he was a Christian missionary, and the fisherman who dropped him off said they just started throwing arrows and spears at him immediately. Anyway, don't go to that island. But look, if you've got a tiny little island, a couple bad things that can happen, right? Large populations can absorb change. They can absorb tragedies, right? But if you have a small population, there's a couple of important phenomenon associated with it. Number one, you can have a genetic bottleneck, right? So evidence suggests that about 70,000 years ago, the number of the Homo sapiens, modern man, went down to a very small number. We're not sure exactly what the environmental causes of that were, but it looks like 70,000 years ago, the number of Homo sapiens went down to a very, very small number, maybe as low as 10,000 individuals on the planet. And that's what we call a genetic bottleneck. On the other hand, if a few individuals land on a desert island and then survive and reproduce, we have what's called the founder effect, right? The founder of the population really influence the type of traits that are going to be exhibited in the population that exists there. So if you had your two redheaded cousins land on the island together, when you come back, everybody in the island would have red hair. And then, of course, last but not least, is this concept of genetic drift, all right? And so if I have small populations, I can have small changes that have big effects on outcome. Well, natural selection is it's a driving force in evolution. Remember, mutation is the source of variation, and selection is the driving force that tells us which traits are going to be successful and what traits are going to be unsuccessful. Of course, the thing about this is that you have to express these genes in order for them to be selected against. Now, these are photos of, I don't even know what they are. It's from some website called Terrible Taxidermy, but they're certainly unsuccessful looking phenotypes there. So this is a very straightforward idea that we've talked about, and simply that if you have adaptations that make you more fit, you're going to be successful, and if you're going to be more successful, of course, the measure of success in biology is how many kids you have, and you'll have kids that have your traits. That's it. And while natural selection is important, it's got huge effects on evolution. It's not the most important, or not the only force that can cause evolutionary change. And so you got the slow buffalo, baby buffalo here, and it's never going to get a chance to have babies. Selection is limited. All right, so we say that the environment selects traits, but unless those traits are expressed, they can't be selected against. And this is kind of like this weird counterintuitive truth about why diseases persist in populations. So if I have a recessive allele, like the sickle cell trait or cystic fibrosis trait, it can just sort of like hang out forever unless it's expressed. All right. So, if you have the homozygous recessive form, you're going to be selected against, right? You're going to have cystic fibrosis. You might have sickle cell disease. That might limit your reproductive viability. But in the heterozygote, you can be fine. And that's why these genes that are not adaptive persist in populations over long periods of time. Of course, we learned about these different types of selection in our last unit, but one more time, remember there's directional, stabilizing, and disruptive selection. And so depending on the selection, I can sort of cause the populations to move, that is to evolve, change over time, which is evolution. And I think we'll stop here today.